Welcome to the Veto episode number 8. I'm here with Wolfie, and all we're going to do today is very quickly wrap up Flashpoint, because that's what we talked about in the last episode, and then the bulk of this one will be IEM, talking a little bit about the group stages, and then going into the playoffs. Got a few days before that, so you guys should get a chance to actually see this before the playoffs. So, as I said, we'll just kick off with Flashpoint, and because we'll be covering some of these teams again, I think the obvious standout is mousesports, because last time when we spoke about kind of playoff predictions or where we saw it going, we talked about mousesports. They had a good event, but by that point, but you could put asterisks by some of their results. It was kind of such an outlier relative to what they'd looked like in the last few tournaments that you could have said, maybe it was just they were just fluking a few of these series, but obviously they went on to win the event, beating G2 in the upper bracket final, and then NIP ultimately in the grand final. So just talk to me about mousesports. I'm guessing you were quite surprised to see them winning, but what went right for mousesports during this event overall?
I mean, I think the first thing is that, they felt stronger and stronger as time's gone on. Originally we looked at them and it was like, shit, get Rops the hell out of there. That project's dead and it's just never going to happen. It's felt, the more time Dexter's had with them, it's felt like the system started to work. He started to see how these 5 parts can come together and actually make a coherent whole. And it's been pretty apparent, right? Their map pool's been going towards the tactical maps. They've been picking nuke a lot. They like to be in their own playground and in a place where they can implement the system rather than the individuals, which is a really weird thing to say of mousesports, because you've got Rops, Frozen, Bemis, but if you put them in a system and tell them exactly what they got to do, then they're going to do it exceptionally well regardless. And that seems to sort of, to my eyes, be where they're going with it. And, when we were looking at it last episode, I was saying, I think this is a bridge too far for them right now. And obviously, hindsight's 2020, it clearly isn't. But I almost stand by what I said. It felt like the timing wasn't quite there for this event. It felt like mousesports, were 90% of the product they could have been. And I think I'd still argue they were. You look at I think the stats of the G2 series, particularly Acorn 0.75, a little bit absent on an AWP. And if you've got Inferno and Nuke in the pool, I want to see a little more from your AWPer. So it almost felt like G2's bad day paid off perfectly for mousesports, right? I'm sure there was a lot of anti-stratting going on. I'm sure there was a lot of, that tactical background. But G2, with Nico the only player going positive in the server, you're going to have a hard time winning a series. So I think they got a little bit of a let-off, almost arguably, with G2, just not. I mean, that's pretty much how you sum up G2 at the moment. Just not. And then you go into the final, and obviously it's this NIP roster who, again, we now have a bit of hindsight on it. They've swapped out ZTR for LNZ, for IEM Summer, which we're going to talk about in a bit. And, it's a transitional roster for NIP. They brought in Device, but as much as, again, he's the only player who goes positive on the entire server for NIP, he's not having that star form, those god moments that he was on Astralis anywhere near as consistently, right? He's there, he's present, he's a good AWPer. He's not having those star moments yet, and I don't think the system's quite built right for him yet. And then ZTR, I think his T-sides just get found out a fair bit at this point, and I'd argue that's almost to a certain extent what they've brought LNZ in for, to give him a little bit more structure around it. So, again, very strong performance from mousesports. Take absolutely nothing away from them. They've hit, a level that I didn't think they were going to hit for probably 1-2 more events when they really did start to have, that time, that tenure behind the system. But at the same time, I think, if Heroic hadn't crapped the bed, if G2 hadn't crapped the bed, it could have been a very different finish.
Yeah, I mean, reflecting on their tournament as a whole, they only dropped 1 map. And considering some of the competition, even if they didn't meet all of the strongest teams in the bracket, I couldn't name the last time a team won a tournament with that many good teams without only dropping 1 map. I mean, I said on Twitter just before they played the final, when was the last time a team actually did it and won an event without dropping a map? And it's a long time ago, and it was in smaller tournaments. It was obviously on LAN at that point, but they weren't as long a format as Flashpoint was, so they were still on a pretty insane run, and to only drop 1 map in the end was, absolutely unbelievable, considering where the team was a few months ago. I think their Inferno was completely unreal, and as every team learnt to their demise, they got picked into G2 and Fnatic picked into it. Fnatic, they've had issues for sure, but they're always a good Inferno team. G2 are fucking monsters on Inferno. Both these teams pick into it, and both of them get smashed by mousesports, and mousesports as well in the final is the third map. They look so good on Inferno. So I think they got helped a little bit in the sense that because they were kind of coming in unsighted because they hadn't played for so long, or at least at a high level, that people were just like, yeah, we'll just play Inferno against them. And it just turns out Mouz are just fucking incredible at Inferno. They win it all the time. Dexter's some god IGL at cooling. Rops can just win every round on the B bomb site. It's just, that's how the rounds play out. So Inferno was like a linchpin to them in terms of just smashing some of these teams or getting these series over the line. That was very impressive. I thought Frozen had an unbelievable tournament. When, from my perspective, Rops should be, by reasonably large margin, their best player. Frozen played an incredible tournament and showed us why he kind of mirrors the trajectory of Rops in some senses because he came from FPL and all that, but more of what he can do as a player, what actual dimensions he has to his game, how he can have more composure than you could ever expect in a late round scenario. These sort of things that for a player of his age and his experience ultimately is just pretty incredible. So to see Frozen flourishing with this lineup kind of already was kind of a win condition for them to win without losing some of their better players over the last few years. So I was very impressed by Frozen, and the Frozen Rops duo was just absolutely insane. It's like comfortably the best in the tournament of Flashpoint, and hopefully in the future we can see those two really punching at a high level because it was just so exciting to see. So exciting to see a new team like mousesports taking on some of the big guns. And again, something I mentioned in the last podcast is that they're kind of good proof that just having the sickest players and stacking your lineup with raw skill, it doesn't matter. It's more about having a system that works, and they proved exactly that because outside of Rops and Frozen, who are we really looking at, to be honest? I mean, Dexter had some great games, but he's still the in-game lead. He's got too much weight on his shoulders to be a massive individual performer. Acor still isn't the player we might have expected a year ago in Mad Lions when he has great performances, especially when they won Flashpoint Season 1. So for them as a team, it's just great proof that they just put in the hours between these events and clearly improved unbelievably well and sorted out their map pool, and coming into some of these later games throughout the bracket, they just got so many maps they liked and they got it over the line in the end, and especially going into the final. After they lost that first map, I was reasonably convinced that NIP were going to win it. I picked NIP as heavy favourites going into that final. And then the last two maps of the grand final was absolutely sick, just winning all the rounds. Rops and Frozen just absolutely unreal. Every afterplan going their way, and NIP didn't even look in the game. So pretty unreal from mousesports, and I don't know when we're going to see them so much in the future, but let's get them at some big events. Hopefully they get some nice invites now from that one. So that's mousesports. Should we move straight on to IEM, or is there any overarching topics?
I mean, the general competitiveness of the scene is just going to come out in fucking bucketfuls again, right? There is no one team at the moment who is going to be, top of the chain every single time. I mean, you come straight off, mousesports winning Flashpoint, Heroic getting knocked, G2 getting knocked, NIP going through to the final. And then you start to look at these games for IEM Summer, and you start to look at some of the teams that you're losing early. I mean, Astralis gone, FPX, despite playing a good game, gone. Fnatic, obviously gone. NIP knocking out Heroic again. Spirit being dropped. NIP then being dropped next round by VP. Like, it's crazy because you look at the 6 teams we've got, and some of them there, you never would have written them in. I mean, so just for clarity, we've got Gambit, G2, EG, Vitality, Virtus.pro, and OG. OG coming in the semi-final as well. I would have put 3 of those teams in those slots. The other 3, I wouldn't have put Evil Geniuses up there. I wouldn't have put Vitality up there based on where they're at in their new system at the moment. And I wouldn't have put OG up there just yet either. And it does, again, just show how ridiculously stacked things are. And I think first up, we got to go through some of the notable absences, right? I mean, Fnatic, I don't know how much you have on this one, because from my perspective, it was just fucking dire, to be honest. Like, they had moments. They put Jaquinho in so many awkward spots where he had to clutch up like 2v1, 3v1, and it almost felt like you were perpetually watching the old guys throw the youngsters under the bus and go clutch this, clutch this, clutch this. And if they didn't, then the series just fell away from them.
I'm guessing you're referring to the NIP series for the most part with
Yeah.
Fnatic. I thought they looked pretty good actually in the series. I think the Ancient pick was quite indicative of where their mindset is as a team, because there's no way, if you have a lot of confidence in yourself to take on good opposition, that you'd come into a tournament with ultimately weeks of practice maximum, probably less, on a map like Ancient, where who knows, who you couldn't have known what it was going to play like. And even now it's still going to have massive variance. So it's quite concerning for me in the first place that they pick into Ancient, and I'm guessing they wanted to make it a home map because they just had no other options and no other maps was working. Everything was going wrong. So they come in, they pick Ancient, they lose it. They didn't look brilliant on Ancient from what I've seen, but as I say, it's just such a volatile map in the first place at the moment that you can't even read too much into that. The other two maps went pretty well. I was quite impressed, but in general for Fnatic, it's just like, where do you go from here? I feel like we had this conversation a few times, but how many more chances do you give the lineup? You've got players like JW coming out and saying, this isn't good enough. We've got to improve, but physically on the server, in terms of the lineup, what are they actually going to change in this team? Are they even going to look at other players? They're going to look at some of the Dignitas players maybe and say that what we've got just isn't working. We need to take some of their pieces or something, because NIP are the ones making all the power plays in terms of the moves, and they've got all the young talents. So it's a tricky one for Fnatic. And I think we'll talk a bit later, I guess, about the ZTR, LNZ swap and stuff like this. But Jacquinho as well is in a reasonably similar position where he kind of, in the nicest possible way, just got like brought up too early, kind of, and just fundamentally he's not got the experience at this sort of level or even the level below. So he's going to have all the growing pains. He's still going through it. So I don't know how long they stick it out with him as the AWPer, because he needs to be performing in that position. Maybe towards the end of the year he can really get it together and really have rounded out his game, but they're kind of sacrificing quite a lot at the moment. I mean, maybe there aren't that many options in Sweden in the first place, but just quite indicative of general problems in the scene where just buyouts are stopping people getting the right players in from just below, and they're having to go elsewhere to players that aren't contracted. So that's the way I look at Fnatic at the moment. I don't really know where they move from here. I think team we have to talk about now is probably Heroic, because Heroic, again, going into a tournament like Flashpoint, I would have taken them to win it. I thought they were, if not the best team in the world, it's going to be Gambit who was the best team in the world. So that's really the sort of how we have to be framing Heroic as a team, is they're punching to be the best team in the world. Go into Flashpoint and they get knocked lower by No. Yes. My memory's fucked.
It's your event, mate. Come on.
Who knocks them lower? It was G2. Confusing myself because I mixed them up with NIP. They got knocked out lower by G2 and then lost to NIP. And they looked a little bit shaky. The map pool looked worse than we saw Pro League, for example, when they're just running over teams. So I think you're seeing them level out a little bit more rather than how they started off so hot. And then coming into IEM, obviously they lose that series to EG. As much as EG has looked good, EG had so many problems, roster influx, Mihu coming in, all this sort of stuff. You just wouldn't expect them to lose to an Evil Genius. That series wasn't great. And then I was watching the NIP series 2 days ago or yesterday or whatever, and that was such a weird game. Like there were so many odd rounds where Heroic were losing really strange scenarios, and NIP, especially on the second half of that Mirage game, the amount of rounds they just bailed themselves out with like individual plays is quite. So if you look at it from NIP's perspective, say sick, the individuals are popping off, but you got to look at it from the other angle. Is we're like Heroic are giving up at advantageous situations. They're letting individual players just like pick them apart, and maybe the team play is falling apart. So I don't know exactly what it is. It might be communication, might be getting flustered, could be burnout, to be honest. I wouldn't be that surprised if that was the sort of thing going on. But for Heroic, the problem for them is, as we mentioned, we want them to be in the conversation as the best in the world, and you can't be losing. As good as G2, as good as NIP has looked in some of these series, you can't be losing to these teams. You need to be losing to a Gambit or something in like the final to stay in that conversation. So I'm a little bit concerned for Heroic in that sense. I think they'll play out all right in the end, but we need to see the next few events really matter for Heroic to really cement themselves back. So tell me what you thought of the Daney boys.
Yeah, I pretty much the same sentiment, to be honest. It was a little bit of a shock to see them going out in the manner they did. I do think EG came into this event with a fucking vengeance, right? Because people have been just, I mean, as you said, right, transitional roster, Mihu coming in didn't make all that much sense when you looked at it just on a litmus test. And then, they've come into this event with a point to prove, and that's proven by the fact they've made it through to the playoffs, despite, I think, pretty much everyone who looked at that bracket
Nobody
going,
would ever pick them to make
yeah,
playoffs.
they're getting clobbered, right? I would have taken Spirit to beat them. I absolutely would have taken Heroic to beat them. So I think little bit of misfortune in that regard, and I think you probably hit the nail on the head as well with Burnout, because they have just been playing so many goddamn events, and teams do need time to go and review the VODs and pick the mistakes, because the problem is that's what teams like EG will have been doing, right? I know EG have got rid of Zeus, so this point starts to make less and less sense as I go on, but they're going to have been using that downtime to watch footage, to break down teams, to spot the small mistakes that creep into Heroic's game when they're playing for 3 months on the trot and not having as much time to do VOD review. And then they'll start to punish when they come up to these tournaments. I was just having a look at the schedule, and I think they've got like 3 weeks off now. I'm not 100%, but I was looking, and the next tournament I could see was Cologne. So they've got a decent stretch of time, and I think that will serve them really well. I'd expect them to come back in firing again at like a Cologne, because obviously, IEM Cologne, all the prestige, they're going to be prepping hard for that. They're going to be firing on all cylinders, and I would expect a bounce back. So, I mean, IEM Summer, I mean, it's a big event, lots of prize pool. Grand scheme of things, probably not the event you're looking at right now. You're probably looking at your RMRs, your Colognes, and then the major in October. Everything else in between is just transitional. Get prac, get time, see if the team's still working right. So, as much as it's a bit shit, I'm not reading too heavily into it yet. I think Cologne will be the big test for me. If they can put up a second best team, a best team in the world performance at Cologne, and really start to push themselves to be that next level, then I'm looking at Heroic in the major, and I'm going, okay, you are starting to ramp up properly for this thing. If it's another disappointing drop at Cologne, then maybe we start to ask the more serious questions. And well, what other teams can we ask serious questions of? I'm just having a look through these brackets. Astralis, I mean, you can go there. I don't have too much to say other than they haven't replaced Device yet, and it ain't fucking working.
I mean, I saw some rumors today that they might be looking to get an AWPer. I have no idea if they're true or not, but in general, as I mentioned, I think when just after they made the roster move, it's just like dupreeh staying as an AWPer and bringing in Bubsky. It's just not a winning move, and
Yep.
they might get to a slightly higher level than this. They might get like whatever, roughly what they had at Flashpoint, 6th, 7th in tournaments, that sort of level, but they're not going to be winning events unless they actually have a very cohesive roster and they have dupreeh in the spots that make sense, and maybe even they make a firm decision between who stays in the lineup between Zipnix and Bubsky, or they have a very, I mean, you can't do it really with the Valve rules, but have a very set maps they play each and stuff like this. So I don't know how it's going to play out for them in that sense, but it's just so hard to know where they go in terms of the roster. But again, I just don't see how they can really move forward from here, because I think they have been playing some really good CS from from in the situation they've been in, and dupreeh has been AWPing pretty well. But as I keep saying, it's like dupreeh can be a great AWPer, but I want dupreeh in the rifling spots. I want him as a hybrid secondary AWPer, and then I want a good AWPer around it. I want what Astralis was their peak with Device, I guess, but in general, I'd like to see them move away from dupreeh AWPing towards somebody else if they could. But apart from that, I don't really know what else they can do. They're just playing too high caliber opposition. How can you beat a Heroic or a Gambit at the moment? Like when you're in this situation, when your practice is probably a bit flummoxed, when whatever Bubsky's playing maps he hasn't played before and stuff like this. So it's all a bit of a mess in that sense. Maybe they got blindsided pretty heavily by the Device move, but in the future, let's get a real AWPer onto Astralis to get dupreeh in the right spots. I think a team we've sort of mentioned a couple of times already is NIP. So there's a lot of angles with NIP. I think what I wanted to ask you is obviously the LNZ, whatever, ZTR swap before this event and taking players out of the academy team. How do you kind of see this dynamic? Why do you think the move was made, and will it pan out in the long run having LNZ on the main lineup?
I mean, why the move was made, ZTR wasn't hitting it at all. I mean, I think I saw someone on Twitter saying stat line, I think it was Maui. He'd like ZTR had averaged like a zero 0.9 over the entire tenure, and LNZ had hit that within his first event, and he did just look a lot more assured in what he was doing. He looked like he belonged. He looked like he thought he belonged as well, and he was taking, reasonably proactive spots, was playing well. He looked solid for my money. I like conceptually what NIP are doing quite a lot. You've got four very experienced, very talented players. You've just brought in, Device, one of the best AWPers in the world on his day, and obviously bringing absolutely bucketfuls of experience. It makes sense from that angle to be, blooding youngsters with this roster, going, okay, we've got the experience, we've got these big names in the roster. Let's get some of our young ninjas, getting some real experience behind them. They'll start to, and they already have started to really compete at the tier 2, tier 3 level. Like, they are looking like a really solid roster, and the stuff they're putting out at the moment is really strong. The problem is, when I look at it, that whole, blooding some youngsters with some older talent, that's like an ESEA Premier level thing. That's what we see with like the Anonymous of the world who have snacks and then all these youngsters and they all learn off of him. I'm trying to think of the other example that I have in my head and I've fucking forgotten it.
Sprout's a good example. Dennis and Spiddy.
Yeah, exactly. Like you've got these teams, right, where you have one or two incredibly experienced, very tenured players, and then they learn off of them. And that works incredibly well at getting these young players up to a better standard. I don't think you should be doing that at tier 1. I think if you want to do that, hire, an experienced player, drop him into the young ninjas, have him work with those four guys, get them start to really fire at a tier 2 level, and then we can have the discussion about bringing them straight up to tier 1 and, having this consistent fifth who sort of drops up and down depending on the situation. I think it's only going to be a matter of time for me before teams find it out. I think we saw it to a certain extent with ZTR. He was getting targeted. He was getting punished. He wasn't hitting his shots as consistently as you want at tier 1. And teams will work you out at the end of the day. If you've got a weak link, teams are going to find them. I guess LNZ's look good. He's looked pretty solid. Obviously, NIP, their run through hasn't been all that great. They got hit by the resurgent OG, who we'll go on to in a bit. Then they got the Fnatic matchup, which, as you said, I thought Fnatic looked a bit shit. You said they were pretty solid. Okay, fair enough. Then they get their heroic game.
Relative to how bad they were recently.
Okay, add that caveat in, yeah. Then they get the heroic game, and they really look solid, and I'm looking at LNZ and going, okay, if you can 2-0 heroic, just slotting into this roster like that, that's looking really good. That's looking really clean. And then they get found out a bit, again, against VP. And that series, I'm trying to cast my mind back to it. To be honest, I don't really remember it. But the fact that NIP are getting 16-4'd on Overpass, that just screams that it's not working out immediately for me. Because that, with ZTR, Overpass was the stronghold. That was the map they looked to, and they clobbered lesser teams on, and they held their own against top teams. So obviously, you're switching players in and out. That's going to cause issues. You're switching ZTR, who clearly really liked Overpass, for LNZ, who maybe doesn't quite so much. And I think, again, that's not a tier 1 thing to do for my money. If NIP want to be this big, hallmark team, we've signed Device, we've paid $1 million or whatever the fuck it was to sign one of the best AWPers in the world. Why are you rotating in academy players then? Sign a 5th, even sign a 6th older player to drop into the academy and be that seeder team for you. And in a year we can have this discussion again. But right now it doesn't quite click for me.
Yeah, from the ZTR angle, the thing is, even if you wanted to make an argument that the academy's set up to give experience and then you could give them a chance in the real roster, the problem is he literally played, I don't know what it would have been, sub a month or something in the academy team before he got the call up because the twist move happened so quickly. So even from his perspective, he didn't really get a chance to get into, to even, have whatever, the 6 months he might have needed to get used to I don't know, like listen to the comms of the main team and speak with some of the main team players and slowly build it up and then get the opportunity. It was just got thrust straight in there. So from his perspective, it's kind of what I mentioned earlier with Jackie and you. It's just like the level they went from in whatever it was, like top of advanced or whatever, to playing at this level is just ridiculously big. Like the gap between that and the pro level is probably as big as like Nova and that. Like I'm not even joking. Yeah. Like it's actually insane how quickly, like advanced is like mixed teams basically. with some teams that are trying to run strats, but they don't really know what they're doing. And then to go from that to the pro level is like insanely different. Where the pro level, everything happens for a reason. Every team's watching demos. It's just so different. Like you have to have so many dimensions to your game. You can't be predictable. You have to watch demos of the other team. You have to know what's coming. You have to have like 10 different ways to play every bomb site for different situations. So I'm not surprised that players like ZCR, Jacquinho are having issues in this sort of scenario. In terms of bringing LNZ in, I thought he looked okay. In some of the games I saw, he looked pretty uncomfortable. So, for example, in Heroic's game against NIP, they smashed them on Nuke, but irrespective, LNZ looked really uncomfortable playing ramp on CT side. And it looks like he's done all the bitch spots on every map, to be honest. So he's probably going to have a few unhappy CT halves throughout his time in the team. But as you kind of mentioned, it's just like neither of them are a long-term solution. Nobody on that academy team is a long-term solution. And I said on like Twitter last night, like imagine a world where Brolan is out of contract and could have joined this team. Or a world where his like whatever his buyout would be reasonable and they could think about it, because Brolan would be such a good player. You could anchor all the spots. You could play roughly the same spots as you have whatever ZTI LNZ in at the moment. Just shove Brolan in. Brolan's going to be super consistent. He's going to be fine in all of these tough situations, which is where like ZTR had his problems when it went super close to games, when it went super high pressure. He's just never been in that environment before, and you know, he's a nice guy, but he had a lot of issues in those, you know, super high pressure games. Exactly what you'd expect, to be honest, in his experience level, considering his just raw age. So I wasn't surprised, but in general for NIP, it does concern me a little bit. I don't think it's the end of the world, because it's like, as I said with Mouz, like the overall team matters a lot more. But if they had a really good option, I think they could take it. And actually, I was just like thinking yesterday, I had this like crazy idea, but I was just you know, NIP might be pretty good if you put like a Freiburg in as the fifth or something. As crazy as it sounds, as like if like a player like Freiburg, who's, you know, a lot of people will say is washed up and he's having, you know, like not a great individual player. I just look at it and say, if you had an experienced player that was going to have a relatively stable output and could play all the role player spots, why wouldn't Freiburg work in this team? So I don't think they should necessarily make that move, but that's what's kind of going through my head is just like if there was a good, reasonably experienced option, if they could get Electro even perhaps, these sort of players. What's happened to Dennis? Is he just dead? Does he still play? Like where's
he plays on plays on Apex.
Yeah, he just plays on Apex, doesn't he? But like,
I casted him a couple of weeks back.
Exactly. Let's get Dennis on the team, or let's get one of the, I don't know, some of the Norwegians probably can speak pretty good Swedish. I think they're quite close languages. So get a Rubino in or something crazy, you know?
That's a show.
I think they should definitely explore some options. But yeah, for NIP, like they've got to be looking forward. They've got good RMR points. Like they've got to fully focus on the major. And I don't think they can win a major with ZTR and LNZ on the lineup. I don't think they could. I don't think they could beat the super high pressure games. All the pressure on LAN, they're just going to crumble those sort of players, in my opinion. And that's where maybe they'd, especially when we get back to LAN, benefit from more experienced players. So I think they look fine. I think they've had a reasonably good introduction of Device. Obviously, the end of the VP series wasn't great. Getting one T round on Overpass, just getting absolutely wrecked like from all directions. Like the crazy thing was like Yekindar had a pretty underwhelming series, and they still got like absolutely ruined on Overpass. But like Sanji was like a god on Inferno and Overpass somehow. Kick it out of having a great map. So I don't know if the stars aligned or something for some of these players, but for NIP, I think they're in a decent spot. But yeah, just looking forwards and where they really want to be. Yeah, there are definitely some questions to ask about the lineup. So that's the Nippy boys. Is there any other teams you want to hit that went out in the group stages?
I'm going to be honest. I think we've got rid of the ones who've gone out. I think we can start going on to the slightly more cheerful stuff of the teams who we've got and how they got here now. I think the immediate, you know, stands out to absolutely everyone is, of course, EG coming back with an absolute fucking vengeance, right? Some very wholesome Twitter interactions between Jason Lake and Obo saying how proud he is. It's nice to see NACS looking after each other a little bit rather than, you know, the relentless tearing of the whole scene down from the inside. So that was nice to see. They looked, I'm going to be honest, like a completely different team. They really, really did. I mean, obviously the news came out, I think, just before or midway through IEM Summer that they'd got rid of Zeus. So I think a lot of what he brings is still going to be there for the roster. And I think you've immediately got a problem of not having a coach, right? They need to plug that hole before the ship sinks again. But they look like a different team. They looked really solid across the board. Obo had some fantastic series. Cirque was starting to hit some of the form we expect of him. And then Stan, Mihu, Breezy doing their roles to a very good standard. So it just looked like all the ideas, all the theory crafting that was behind these EG changes just suddenly started to show itself in the server, right? You had all these pieces and you were sat here watching them bomb out of every fucking tournament under the sun and going, what needs to change? Why aren't these pieces working? I can see a world where maybe if we tweak this and this and this, and they've thrown all the right ingredients in the cauldron, it's bubbled and boiled over, and now they've got a really fucking solid team. And again, it is just ridiculous how goddamn competitive things are at the moment, because EG, on the form they've come through that bracket in, I think it's really, really unfortunate they've got Gambit first round. I think if they had Vitality, I'd certainly be backing them to make that seriously competitive. If they had VP, if they had a good day, and as you said, Yukindar has another underwhelming one, they just sort of, cobble it together on VP, I could see them taking that on a good day based on their current form as well. I think the only team in the quarters who I can't reasonably say EG could beat is Gambit. So it's really fucking unfortunate they've got them in the quarterfinals. I think it's still an absolutely fantastic result given, they've sort of become the butt of quite a few jokes. HLTV tweeting they've gone from wherever they were to the third best team in NA. And it's like, oh, God damn it. Like, come on, EG, you've got to do something. You've got so many incredibly talented players. And the fact they finally are starting to do something is just fantastic to see.
Yeah, I'd be crying when I saw that Gambit bracket. And that's just like so upsetting when you're like, the other matches would have just been so much better for you. So
yeah,
that's a bit unlucky for them. I think the thing about EG was, even like at the start of this year when it was like an absolute train wreck, like it was just so perplexing to me. I see this with a few teams where it just doesn't make any sense, where stages in like last year, and especially when we're on LAN and stuff, they look so much better, and it's not even been that long since then, and everything's going wrong. The team play's falling apart. They're making super like unusual mistakes for some of the caliber of players they had. So even when it was at the very bottom, it was always a question of like, what's actually going wrong for them here? And I think now with hindsight, you can perhaps say that the COVID, the pandemic, maybe even the practice environment in NA, potentially Tarek and Ethan looking away from playing CS full time at that point. You might even look at it from that perspective of, maybe that's an explanation where motivation on certain players, practice was falling apart. I don't know, these sort of things. And it's just another case of a team where they bring in players which aren't essentially a massive upgrade, I wouldn't have said, over Tarek and over Tarek and Ethan, but they're hyper motivated. They're back playing at the top level. Mihu's not playing in like shit league fucking envy anymore. He's playing on a good team. Like, they come in super motivated, and with a lineup that on paper doesn't look that much better to me, or even better than what they had before. They're just playing like lights out, like way better Counter-Strike than we would have expected. And it's just another example of a team where the individuals don't matter that much. It's about having the right cohesive unit, having the comms good, having, good practice going into the event, having a good map pool, all that. So all of it came together here. I was very impressed. The Heroic series was brilliant. I enjoyed the moment where Anders was like tweeting. So Anders has been tweeting throughout the whole event, and every time he says the team's going to win, they always lose horrifically. Like as soon as he's tweeted it, and he tweeted during the Heroic EG game, like when EG were up big, saying like, EG are saving NACS, and then from there, Heroic made a massive comeback to win Nuke, and like I was crying. I was like, Anders, please stop! Like you're gonna ruin all of these teams. But they got over the line in the end. They defied the Anders commentator curse, all that. So I was impressed. So yeah, I think for EG, they just look like the team they should have been, in my opinion, throughout all of this year. And I always thought they should be really in the top 5 in the world, or competing for that level. And I'm not sure they're quite there yet, but at least we're seeing the signs of life that we've been yet to see over this year. And it's just good to see a team with good name value and that we've seen in the past back up at the top again. So exciting for them. The Gambit matchup is a bit of a downer. They can probably give them a reasonably good match. They've shown quite a reasonably wide map pool throughout the group stages. So hopefully they can get it to 3 maps. And then, if you get it to a 3rd map, win both pistols, resets, you always stand a chance. So hopefully from that perspective, they can make it competitive, but I'll be taking Gambit to win that one. And then yeah, so EG they've had a good run so far. We expect them to go out in the quarters, but just for them, they would have taken that. I think they would have taken a playoffs appearance here, considering how underwhelming the rest of the year has been for them. So that's EG. I guess we'll stay in this side of the bracket. Let's do Gambit. So they're going to be facing Gambit. We've already said that Gambit is still going to be favourites, even though Gambit, of course, came through the lower end of the group stages. So talk me through Gambit throughout this tournament. Obviously, Gambit is definitely in contention, might be the best team in the world. That's the way we're looking at Gambit. So how have you seen Gambit so far in this tournament? And even though they, of course, didn't come through the didn't get straight to the semi-finals, are they still in a position to win this tournament? Are Gambit even still the favourites to win the tournament? How do you see them throughout the group stages and moving forwards?
So for my money, Gambit are still favourites to win the tournament. I would still say you can't write off the form they've been having at the moment. You know, a couple of bad best of threes don't change a team, and they have, you know, been playing by far the best CS we've seen out of anyone in a long time. So yes, still favourites. Talking through how the bracket goes, obviously they clobber Sprout, right? That's just a stacked matchup. It's never going to go any other way. They clobber that, then they get Vitality, and they get one of the weirdest vitalities that I've seen in a long while, because for a while Vitality seemed to be anchoring around this ZywOo and Shox show thing, and that made a lot of sense to everybody who was watching, because Shox was previously, you know, one of those big, you know, lights out flashy players. ZywOo is ZywOo, and then you've got Apex, Masuta, Kyojin, who can, you know, sit back, play the anchor roles, make the space for these guys to go off and pop and do their thing. And then apparently Masuta decided he didn't like that anymore, and that he was going to be Shox from 5 years ago. And he just played the most fucking lights out series I have seen him play anywhere ever, full stop. He looked unstoppable. He was just so damn good. Aim was crisp, game sense was on point. He just seemed to know what was happening before anybody else, and he was in the right positions at the right time to punish absolutely everything. It was, honestly, I think his performance of his career so far, you know, against the best team in the world, he has come out, had an absolutely lights out series, a 1.38 rating, only eclipsed by, of course, the man himself, ZywOo. It's honestly, I feel a little bit bad, you know, hyping Masuta up this much, but we expect it of ZywOo now. This is the problem. I expect him to have lights out series against the best players in the world. I expect him to be that, you know, figure at the top of the Christmas tree, looking down on the rest of CS like, what the fuck are you doing? So for Masuta to step up to that standard it's absolutely incredible. And I think the only problem is how consistently can you rely on it? Because yes, he did it against G2, but when he did it against G2, ZywOo wasn't this, you know, prodigy that we've seen before. Kyojin, Shox, and Apex were a little bit quieter than we've seen them before. And I think for Vitality, you know, you can sort of play that into Gambit's hands. You can go, okay, you know, Masuta's only going to have so many lights out series. Gambit get caught off guard by it a little bit. They're not expecting that caliber. They drop into the lower bracket. Then they get the Astralis. We've touched on it before. Again, Gambit should be putting them to bed every day of the week. I mean, maybe not a 2-0. Maybe Astralis should be taking a map in there, but it's an Astralis who are looking a bit splintered, a bit fractured at the moment, so we'll leave them be. Then they get Complexity, and Complexity are another one of these teams where you look at the parts and at times they seem to work great and other times they just don't seem to work at all. And it was, again, very weird series because, you know, Gambit 16-7 Mirage, okay, job done. You know, they'll clatter their way through Overpass. That'll be the end of things. And then on their map pick of Overpass, Complexity come back in a really big way, having some really big series from the likes of Poison, Flame F, JKS chiming in. Rush, the only player who's negative, but Rush is expected to be negative because he entries, he takes the bitch rolls, and he does the work to make the space for his teammates. And then third map's really close. Again, 16-14, agonizing for Complexity. And I think that, for me, is the only question mark I put over Gambit at the moment. They don't seem necessarily to be able to shut down series quite as quickly as I'd expect them to. Like that Complexity series, for my money, if you've taken Complexity's map pick and Mirage, that's a 2-0. It has to be a 2-0. You have to be put in. Again, if you're the best team in the world and you're coming up against a team who are ranked 13th, who sometimes the pieces don't quite click, and even when they do, there's gaps and there's loopholes and there's, you know, little bits that can be exploited. Gambit have to be putting those teams to bed 2-0. I still think they're favourites to win the tournament. I think I am being incredibly critical on a team who has had an absolutely meteoric rise over the last 6 months, but when you're the best team in the world, you put a target on your back, and you do have to be this critical if you want to stay there.
Yeah, Complexity is a weird one. So Complexity is a team that, how many series? Three best of threes at the Flashpoint B stream we had them on, and a couple of interviews as well with Blame F and Config. So Complexity is in a very strange place, and what Config said was they're a team that really struggles to play outside of a boot camp or a LAN environment. I don't know whether that's motivation or focus or something like this, because they just had some really strange series at Flashpoint. They had one against FPX, which was like the worst I've ever seen Complexity ever play. They got absolutely wrecked on both maps by FPX. And they, like, in that series, they were losing every 3-on-3, every 2-on-2 to a ridiculous degree. I don't think they won. I think they won like 1 out of whatever it would have been, like 15 or something. Like absolutely insane levels of like falling apart late round. And then who was it? It must have been Config said that he reflecting on it, he just said he didn't know exactly the problem was, but it was just a disaster. They got it together a bit, but the competition they were playing at that point in Flashpoint was like not on the level of a Complexity or where Complexity should be. So they were just cleaning up in the end. I think Sprout and Anonymo in the end, I think it was. But so in that respect, Complexity is kind of all over the place. They've got kind of big overarching problems where they need to get whatever's going wrong in this online environment for them. They just got to get on top of it and start actually using their pieces better. So from that perspective, for them to give Gambit a very close series, it's a little bit concerning from Gambit's perspective. The thing is, though, for all tournaments, I always kind of lean towards the viewpoint that group stages are always just kind of about survival, especially at the current moment in CS where the calendar is very packed and you come out of one tournament and you've got days before you go into the next one. Especially for this Flashpoint to this one was insane how quickly I went from 1 to 1, as well as I guess for the CIS RMR that went well. So like you can just like imagine that they just come off that whole experience, they got to go straight into this. You know, it's quite a difficult thing to get really focused for those games to come in with loads of practice. So I wonder from that perspective whether that hurt them, but they have eventually got through the group stage and they are in a good position going into the playoffs. I think the big question for me with Gambit over the next few months is obviously when they broke out and they came from whatever the 15th best team to maybe a best in the world contender almost immediately at whatever Katowice and beyond that. It's like everyone's watching them now. It's ridiculous how many people are watching Gambit. There's the amount of teams that have like spots named after them and have call outs and have loads of strats named like Shiro and like Nafany and all that. Like everybody's been watching them flat out for like 2 months. So I really do question for them when they're playing teams with big support stuff, which they will do in this playoffs, whether that will impact them, whether now that people have seen a lot of them playing, or they'll be much more prepared for a play style coming out from a Gambit, because in my eyes, much they bring a lot of ideas. I think if you played them a few times, you're going to have a much easier time against them. You're just going to expect more solo plays. You're going to expect their weird timings. So I'll be very, very interested to see in this playoffs, and especially moving into some tournaments later on in the next few months, how this sort of thing dynamic plays out. But if I go off what I've seen before, I still would pick them to win the tournament. But as I said, particularly who have they got on their side of the bracket? So G2 definitely is going to have a massive support staff. Probably EG does as well. Even though they lost Zeus, I bet they have a good support staff. And especially going into a final matchup, if they hit a team like an OG or especially a Vitality, would have 400 people looking at all the demos or something going into that sort of matchup. So it's a big question for me. I'll still pick them to win it. And as I said, even though they're a little bit shaky in the group stages, for me, it's still about survival, and the calendar plays into that. And obviously going into the playoffs, they've had a reasonable break, so they can get whatever. There is burnout problems and whatever, they can get back on top of that. But it also gives the other teams time to prepare. So for me, that's the big storyline for Gambit. Let's do the G2 squad, because this is, again, another team where it's like sort of the same scenarios we had there with EG, where disastrous results to start off the year, especially compared to what you would have liked to have seen. And then they make a move from Kenny S to initially Nico AWPing a lot, and now it's more so Amanek. And you look at it and you say, this is inferior downgrade. Can Jax even work again at this level? Can he play in an English communicating team? And it's just instantly working, and they just look instantly a top 5 team from out of nowhere, and then everything's clicking almost immediately. So G2, they won their group here. They look pretty good at Flashpoint. They came third place there. So how do you look at G2 at the moment? And obviously, we're expecting a Gambit matchup there. So how do you see them playing out in the playoffs, and where do you see G2 as a team overall right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did quite a long bit on G2 last time. I think last episode I went on a rant about why the fuck would you put Nico on the AWP. So I'll gloss over the ranty stuff. Straight off the bat, they got quite an easy run. I think up until that upper final against Vitality, extra salt, G2 should be putting them to bed. Fun plus Phoenix, yes, they came in with a very well prepped Ancient. Yes, they came in with Madden, firing off to a level nobody's really seen from him before. It's still Fun plus Phoenix, and that's pretty much what you saw from them, right? Great Ancient. They took Ancient off G2. Then they went to Dust 2. They got out firepowered. They went to Inferno. They got outplayed. And that was the bottom line. I think the big standout result is the Vitality series. Obviously, we'll touch on them again in a bit. I'll leave the Masuta show for later. In terms of the bracket, I think they're a semi-final knockout for Gambit. I think they are just food for Gambit at this point because, again, it's a little bit unfortunate because if I put them on the other side of the bracket, if I put them with a Vitality of Virtus.pro, then maybe we're seeing G2 in the final. And maybe they can take out those kind of teams, right? We know they can with consistency. I mean, we saw them do it with Vitality in the groups. It's just, again, one of those ones where whoever's on Gambit's side of the group at the moment, I think they're in for a pretty rough time. So, I mean, G2, you touched on it. They've started to really click. They've started to look really solid. I think they definitely are on the right tracks for starting to hit that top level of form coming into the major, which, again, every single fucking team should be aiming for, regardless of what they're doing. So I think they are building themselves really nicely into that. Obviously, grabbing themselves a nice chunk of RMR points from Flashpoint. With Kenny dropping in and out, they needed to start getting some of those on the board as well. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate. They're my semi-final dropout here, third, fourth place team. Again, just chipping away at those top teams in the world. I think that's what G2 have got to be looking at doing right now, right? Take maps off Gambit, run Gambit close, take maps off Heroic, run Heroic close. Start to put the pressure on the big boys so that the cracks start to appear 3-4 months down the line when you're really hitting your best form, and then you can start really smashing it into the major. I think that's what G2 have got to be looking at right now.
Yeah, I think I like G2 quite a lot, actually, at the moment. I like how they play. They have kind of the same thing that Astralis have, where it kind of, as much as Amanek, I much prefer the Amanek situation to what Astralis has, because they kind of, at least they've realized that having Nico in the spots where he's freed up is the right way to go, and having him on a rifle and having him, he could secondary AWP on, depending on the map or whatever. Definitely a better way around to do it. And I think it's kind of maybe a little bit like Team Liquid in that sense, where you kind of have a very serviceable AWPer, and the firepower is going to come from a Hunter and Eco, those sort of players. So it's still, it makes a lot more sense in my head. I think it is a kind of, not necessarily a long-term option, but it's an option where they can afford to hold out for a few months, or maybe even all the way to the major, in case a really good option comes up, versus Astralis, where they might be scrambling for options. So from G2, I'm much more pleased about how that's playing out. And I do think Amanek has looked, it just reminds me a lot of when the whole Nitro situation, he was AWPing for Team Liquid, where surprisingly good for a player that you wouldn't have thought really could AWP at all. I know we've seen the hybrid quite a lot, but it's a different beast when you've got to pick it up and play off your spawns and call around yourself. So I have been impressed. I like the way they play. I think they're a monstrous team on the CT side, actually. I think they're really brilliant at being super proactive and making good reads and stuff. They look a lot like Heroic to me on the CT side, and I think Heroic are a brilliant CT-sided team. So I think G2, there's a lot of things to like about them. I think their T-side calling has actually been pretty good, and I like their playbook on T-side, especially a map like Inferno has been great. So I like a lot of things about G2. Again, the question is, if they came up against a Gambit, could they beat them? Doesn't seem likely. I don't think it's clear cut though. I think they still probably 30% maybe in that matchup to win the series. So I still give them a reasonable chance. And obviously, I haven't gone through the veto if that did happen, but I'm sure there would be a map in there. Probably Inferno, they probably win that. If they could get it to a reasonable third map, they probably stood a chance of winning that series. So I like a lot of things that I'm seeing from G2. Obviously here, not the hardest bracket, but at Flashpoint, they did have some much harder matchups, and they took down some great teams. Heroic, NIP in the first game. The second game against NIP, they're definitely in position to win that at times, so they couldn't get it over the line. And obviously players like Hunter having a great event, Nico always looking good. And as we said, Amanek is perfectly serviceable. And Jax as well. Jax has got to give a shout out to him because in terms of coming so quickly back to this lineup and instantly performing at a pretty reasonable level when he's not playing all the best spots is really impressive. And I can't remember exactly what he was playing. He's probably still playing anchor spots in the old lineup when he was playing, but like he's almost certainly been thrown around a lot in terms of his spots, and he's just sort of been told that you're going to play all Amanek spots where he was playing before, and he's playing reasonably well. So good stuff from him, and hopefully from his perspective, he can kind of solidify himself as an individual, and even if he doesn't stay in this team in the long run, he can get onto another good team, actually come out of this in a good situation rather than just being on the bench as it was before. So G2, I'm reasonably hopeful, and I do think if they did play Gambit, it'd be a great series. So I hope we see that one. Okay, should we do the bottom side of the bracket?
Let's do it.
Let's do OG. Let's do it. So OG is a team, as I mentioned, I think in the last episode, they're a team that I thought would have been a sleeper pick to go really far at Flashpoint. And speaking to some of the other talent at Flashpoint, they were another team that they were looking at as a dark horse where it just looked like a lot of sense on paper. And even though they didn't make it to Blast through the showdown, they still had some great series in there, still showed really great performances considering how much practice they would have had. So OG, they won their group. Good run for them. And obviously coming off the back of Flashpoint when they're in last place, very good to see them having good performances. So OG, they're in the semi-finals. They've got arguably an easy side of the bracket because they just don't have Gambit there. So how do you see OG at the moment, and should they be a favourite to make the final at this point?
Oh, that's a rough one. They're good. They're not yet great, is what I will say. From my opinion of OG, I will put asterisks on that because OG very opinionated on them. MBK fanboy, drop MBK, you're automatically in my bad books. But they've looked really good, and I think they looked like that sleeper team you were sort of expecting at Flashpoint, right? Nice best of one series to open things up, taking out NIP, no mean feat, good job there. Nice clean 2-0 against a VP who are looking pretty damn resurgent as well, and going through that lower bracket run, I think it really does put the VP win into context a bit, because VP beating the likes of Spirit, beating the likes of NIP. You know, if you looked at previous results and then you looked at VP, you'd go, all right, they should be clubbing them 2-0, but if you look at the context of the whole tournament, then it is actually a pretty solid win. And then again, very similar thing with EG. You've got to look at it in context of this tournament. If you take that matchup out of context, ignoring the other games EG have played, it's another one where they should be clean 2-0ing it. But they are up against these resurgent teams, these teams with a point to prove. And I think taking them down, arguably on its day, is harder than some of the big teams, right? When you've got these teams who really feel like they've got to prove their point. They've got to make the case that they are these top 5 teams in the world again. VP obviously did it for a stint, then started to drop off with Gambit coming through. EG, you know, we've been through that clusterfuck, and now they're trying to make a name for themselves again. So OG looked really solid. They look really impressive. Flames having some really nice series, especially against Evil Geniuses, just further cementing himself into that. And I think that is, you know, that is the real crown jewel in the armor of OG at the moment is Flames. He is settling into that role more and more as time goes on. He's starting to really find his footing, and I think they have got a star in the making there, especially under the armor of someone like Alexi B. It feels like they made a few changes, they made a few moves. They went from a roster that we were, you know, really heavily criticizing. If we're going to be honest, you know, we were saying MBK probably got to go, Issa probably got to go. You need to be making some pretty swathing changes. You know, you were talking about maybe Mantu has to go as well for this to work. They've made 2, I wouldn't say contentious changes, but the Flames one was definitely quite a large call. Obviously, he'd been on Endpoint, he had some experience there, but he was still a relative unknown. He is still a very young player. They seem to have done their research and picked incredibly well because he is popping off, and I think anybody who'd seen him on Endpoint knew he had the potential to do it, but he's realizing that potential, and that has put OG, arguably, for my money, finalists in this tournament. I think whoever comes out of that Vitality Virtus.pro, I think the only real world I see them maybe dropping and it starts to become more like a 60-40 in their favor is if you get the Vitality with Masuta and Zaiwu showing up at the same time, maybe even Shock starting to show up again in that spot. That's where Vitality could potentially look to punish, but OG have looked, again, like that sleeper team we expected. They've looked well drilled. They've looked great individually. Flames has been playing lights out CS as we know he can, and it's put them in a fantastic spot.
I was just looking through their veto. They're still permering Vertigo, which is what they did beforehand. So they're leaving Ancient in the map pool. I believe Vitality is also permering Ancient, but if they did play Virtus.pro, that would be crazy. And if Virtus.pro picked into Ancient in that matchup, I'd just lose my shit. It'd be great. I'd just be rejoicing. It'd be so exciting to see that happen, because I think it will happen at some point in this playoffs. It will definitely certainly be a third map at some point, but there'll be a matchup where a team that just hasn't played it before is now playing it in a super high caliber match, and it's just like complete madness, complete chaos. The commentators will be enjoying it, but I don't think the players will. Be horrendous, not knowing what's going on. So yeah, for OG, kind of touched on all of this kind of already in other stuff. I think the way they were very calculated with bringing in Flames and then the spots they put him in, and they got him in good spots where they're abusing his mechanics and letting players like Alexi, for example, do a lot of the calling, which is exactly how you should use him. And maybe some ninjas in pajamas should learn that you put the young inexperienced players that have good mechanics in these spots where you don't have them having to be relied upon too much to make great decisions. You'd put in that on other players. So Flames is in incredibly good spots, and he likes to be proactive, he likes to be aggressive. So it's all like a perfect scenario where as soon as he's in a position to get aggressive and he's got players throwing good util and he's got Alexi probably calling and saying, let's go for this aggressive play with this spawn, it's all just coming together and it all just makes sense. So I like that one. I think the Nico pickup was a good one in terms of good experience, good seeing the system in Heroic and bring that over. Whatever went wrong with Heroic, we don't know. But certainly for a team like OG that was probably towards the bottom end of the top 10 or just outside, it definitely is the right sort of player to bring in, considering where Nico was. So I like the lineup a lot overall. They have a lot of versatility on Nico. Alexi being Valde, which it didn't have with the old lineup, where just like Alexi and Valde had to do so much in terms of riflers, and Alexi's already got the world on his shoulders. So I like this lineup a lot. And in terms of where they can go in this playoff bracket, I could definitely see them making the final. Probably, I think it's closer to 50-50, actually, whoever comes out of that one. But I probably still take OG, and then going into the final, I see how it goes. Maybe an Ancient comes up or something crazy. You probably still take, for my money, the G2 Gambit winner out of that side of the bracket to win it. So OG, I'm reasonably positive. I like what we're seeing, and I'm very happy to see that... we mentioned in the last show, the most disappointing thing for me with Flashpoint for OG is just not seeing them play a lot of CS. And it's just pleasing to now see them play a good number of series, and hopefully they play some more in the playoffs at the same sort of level. So let's round out this bottom half of the bracket. Talked a little bit on Vitality, about Masuta having good performances when he's a player that, he only realistically came into up this level a year ago, had a reasonably good year over the second half of last year. But now we're starting to see him blossom potentially a little bit more. I don't think his spots have changed particularly in terms of going from RPK to Kyojin. Maybe they've made a few smaller changes very, very recently, but I don't think that's the explanation if he is having a great tournament. I think it's more like now he's starting to grow into that role. Maybe he's a bit more assertive. I don't know. Stuff like this, just maturing as a player, perhaps, in terms of what we've seen in the past. But Vitality is still a team for me that's still a bit in flux. They had such a rocky performance at Flashpoint and before that, obviously, that I still don't have massive confidence in them to have got it all together. And it's just they had such fundamental intrinsic problems, probably calling wise. It's just like communication, maybe. And obviously the RPK swap was kind of like a last resort where they had to make a change because they didn't know what else to do. So I'm still concerned for them in that respect. But this looks like the beginning of the recovery. But I don't think it's yet. I don't think now that Vitality is going to be absolutely sick throughout the playoff brackets and win the whole tournament. I think it's like they'll come maybe top 4 or top 6 or whatever here. The next event, maybe they'll do about the same. And we can slowly see them build towards the major ultimately in the end. But I don't think this yet is what final form Vitality is. Would you agree with that? Would you say that they're still on that trajectory?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, we were quite harsh on them. I think everyone was quite harsh on them when they initially did the 1-for-1 swap RBK for Kyojin. You went, it's not a complete rebuild of the system. It's bringing in another piece, but the problem is it's bringing in another relatively young piece, and they have been, as you said, pretty heavily rebuilding around this system. I think Masuta has come into his own at the perfect moment because, as I said previously, it was the Zywoo and Shock show for a good chunk of the last few months, and that had a shelf life. That's always going to have a shelf life. There's going to be a point where Shock starts to drop off again. There'll be a point where Zywoo stops having 1.6 rated series, and then you need people to step up and fill the gaps. So yeah, I think Masuda's looking really great. I said it before, really starting to blossom. He could be, one to really start watching in the next 6 months to a year. And Vitality, I don't think there's too much to really weigh in on. As you said, six this tournament, maybe top four the next, start to build it. Arguably, I mean, we say every single team looks to the major. I think Vitality obviously will be looking at and targeting that major. But this team, in all honesty, is probably looking even further beyond that. They're probably looking at, the first major in 2022 as a real, real serious target to be winning. Because I think if you give them another 6-9 months, they are going to be an incredibly solid team. As you said, they've got support coming out their backsides. They've got so many staff, so many people whose sole goal it is to make this CS team better. And when you have 5 very talented players, if you put that support network behind them, they are going to flourish. So, yeah, I think Vitality, they're one for the future for me. They're not quite there yet. They are obviously still just on raw talent, going to be knocking themselves into these top 6, top 4s. I'd expect them to make top 8 in the major. Again, look 2022. Look, first major of 2022. I think that's going to be when Vitality, especially with lands coming back, you bring the experience of Shocks and Apex. Zywoo's had a couple of lands under his belt as well. Get the youngsters in, get them going, and that's when we see the best of Vitality.
Yeah, I think something you have to remember actually for Vitality is a year ago they're in a reasonably similar position when they went from Alex and they went towards Masuta and Apex Calling. And when that happened, you would never, ever, ever have picked them to have such a good year as they did last year. Towards the end of the year or the middle of the year when they're having finals and some tournament wins, this sort of caliber contention for best top 3, top 2, maybe even best in the world at times. So from that perspective, what I'd say is like they might get it together a lot quicker than we're expecting, and that's probably a testament to their support staff. So I don't think they're a write-off, and I don't think it's absolutely out of the question they could have a similar situation to last year where it comes together very quickly. But as I said, for me, it's still on a development process here. I don't think it's going to be instantly sick and back to whatever top 3, top 2 level that we saw or whatever at the end of last year going into this year. So final team in the bracket, Virtus.pro. What I'll say for Virtus.pro is that, so last night, me, Maui, and Duncan, Foreign, recorded a new kind of talk show format where Duncan wants to do stuff where we do like an extended pre-game going into matches. So we talked a lot about Virtus.pro in this game. So for that one, to go and listen to that, I think it'll be on YouTube. I don't know what he's calling it. Something desk. I can't remember what it's called, but go and watch that and you'll get a lot more insight into Virtus.pro. So to give you kind of the bullet points of what we kind of discovered from that is that Maui was saying that apparently some of the players on Virtus.pro are having health problems or something along this respect. And that potentially has been a reason why they went from such a high level at, say, a Katowice or the end of last year. And it's just looked a little bit flat in the last few tournaments, the last couple of months, compared to when they were coming so hot at the start of this year and the end of last year. So from what Maui said, that was potentially a problem. From the games that I saw here at IEM Summer, it looked like their mid-round calling was a bit suspect. And this has always been a problem for Virtus.pro, where they've always had some issues mid-round, and it's been like they're at their best when they're getting the entry frags, when they're dictating the pace. And when you're getting the entry frags, when you're getting super aggressive and you're like forcing the issue, you don't need to mid-round because you're just calling from spawn or whatever. When mid-round it gets really hard, when you can't get the entry, when it goes 4-4 and there's stuff happening all over the place and the comms get flustered, that's when it's really tricky. And in some of these games here, that's been their problem, is like getting flustered mid-round, slowing down too much perhaps, like getting out rotate, getting out called. Especially in the OG series, that was happening so much, where Alexi was just like calling. That's like one of the best games I've ever seen him call that series. Incredible. So yeah. So for Virtus.pro, those are kind of the big storylines right now, is mid-round calling and potentially individual problems, because that's very hard to know how big that is or whatever. But there might be some stuff going on behind the scenes for Virtus.pro in terms of why they're not quite at the level we might have expected. So we kind of glossed over it there initially. So I just want to ask you straight off with this one. Virtus.pro versus Vitality. Who would you actually take to win this series going into that one?
This is honestly probably the hardest to call for me out of the whole thing because, as you said, VP, they went from being that second team, that second fiddle to Gambit to relative and anonymity. I hate that word so much. I try and avoid it like the fucking plague. But they can still do it. I think it really is, for me, a 50-50 that is dependent on some very specific factors. Like VP, Yakindar can't go quiet. They've got to play aggressive. They've got to play proactive. They've got to play to all of their strengths. And as you said, don't get caught into those mid rounds because Apex will call them, Masuta will call them, and they will punish you. And, you know, if VP do that perfectly and they get Vitality on a little bit of an off day, then I think they take it. I think if Vitality, Masuta shows up, Zywoo shows up, and then one of the remaining three puts in a solid performance, decent anchors across the board, then they probably take the series on their own right. And it really does, for me, this is the 50-50. This is the who shows up on the day, what individual has the series. You know, does Zywoo go nuts? Does Yakindar have another one of those just monstrous Inferno games where he entries banana every single round, seems to get all the kills every single round, and Vitality are getting flustered off the back of that? Then that snowballs. You know, there's so many permutations and different ideas for how it could go. I think VP, it's a little unfortunate that they dropped off in the way they did, and sort of the whole Gambit story really eclipsed it, because you look at how, I'm going to be honest, awful a Vanguard looks off the back of that major win, where they just went major win, major final, 1-2, and they just went completely downhill, right? And you looked at it and you went, oh god, from a Vanguard's perspective, they've made the miracle sell here. They've got rid of the roster to VP. They've made a nice chunk of money. They're the new QBF. It's not going to happen. They're going to fall apart. Made a couple of smart changes, couple of smart positional moves, and they really started to rocket again. And I think they can, especially if what you've said, Maui said, third party, he said, she said, but if they are having some personal problems and there are some health issues in there as well, if they can get those sorted, get back to the kind of form they were having, then they are serious contenders again. I think at the moment, just on mouthfeel for how this whole tournament's gone, probably edging Vitality to take this, especially again if Masuta has another one of those series. And then, yeah, maybe next tournament, maybe tournament after that. If VP can iron out whatever's going on in the background, get the focus straight and solely onto the game again, then they really start to become contenders for me.
I think I'll take VP to win that series. Ooh. I think so. If you guys do go and watch the 4-win video we did, I picked NIP going into that series. I think it's quite a weird one because going into it, we kind of all tricked ourselves into thinking it was heavily NIP. And the more we talked into it and the more we talked through the matchup and the more we talked through particularly the ZCR and Z swap and stuff, the more we realized that this really is a really close matchup. And, with the maps that come out of the veto, so like it was always going to be Mirage Inferno at the start. Like VP, as much as they've had some issues on Mirage, there's nothing fundamentally that would stop them having an incredible Mirage game and winning that map. They took it to 16-14 in the end. They didn't win it, but that was kind of my thought process looking at the vetoes. Was like, you can't count VP out of this. They've got so many chances in the series. They've got so many maps they like that as much as NIP has looked a bit hotter of late, you couldn't count them out. So I did take NIP, but it was always kind of the caveat there. And obviously VP did win it. Brilliant on the CT side of Overpass and the end of smashing it there. So I was quite impressed by that series. And as I said, the OG game was such a case of just OG just outcalling them so hard. And like, I don't know what it was, if it was Prep or Alexi B on the day or maybe Jame from that perspective. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was such a bizarre game. And so it's rare you will see it like that. It's normally very nip and tuck and people are kind of guessing and, like it kind of averages out over a series. But that was one where OG, like every round, they're getting it so right. So that was a bit weird. And that's kind of why I still think Virtus.pro are a pretty good team in this bracket. I would just edge it over Vitality. I can see it going, there's so many factors for both teams. Say the Yakindar had a bit of a weaker series against NIP. If Yakindar's back in top form, well, that's going to be a big problem for Vitality. If Sanji is anything close to that level again, as we saw in some of those maps, I mean, God help you. Like, how are you going to stop him in that scenario? And then again, from the Vitality perspective, any time Shocks can just win you a game. He's that sort of player. Zywoo, he can just rack up CT rounds as much as he likes. You can just put him on T-side and just clutch it out all the rounds. So both teams, I think it's actually quite an individual dependent matchup, I'd say, actually, for this one. Not necessarily in terms of style. I just think with some of their inconsistencies and what we might know about some of these teams and the places they're in, it might just literally be a case of, does Shox show up like a god? Does Sanji have another great series? Does Yakindar get back to the form we like to see? Does James have from time to time, James has an unbelievable series and just completely top frags and, you know, comes out of his shell a bit in terms of warping, gets much more proactive. So there's a lot of questions around the individuals, but I'll just edit it to VP. And then if we did see an OG VP matchup, again, it was so perplexing that series I saw the last time. I would not be surprised if they might push the veto slightly differently, VP, but I would not be surprised if it goes much closer and VP wins it. So I probably still just edge it to OG. Of course, we've seen them already beat them once, so you would do that. Yeah. But I would not be surprised if Virtus.pro takes it 3 maps and have a chance of winning it, and I wouldn't be gobsmacked if they did win it. So Virtus.pro is still a bit of a sleeper team here for me in this bracket, and if they have been having health problems, I have no idea what's going on, but if they can get on top of that, whatever, in these 4 days and kind of focus up, they've only got a few more matches left. I think we still could see a good playoff bracket from them. So as we get towards the end of this one, is there any overarching storylines here in the bracket we want to kind of very quickly touch on? We're seeing Gambit as the favourites. Is it really a question of who can beat Gambit to win this for you, or is there any other overarching storylines here? Could OG actually win it? Could OG win it? They got to the final.
For me, it's Gambit.
Yeah.
For me, it's who beats Gambit, right? It is going to be that for the next probably couple of months. They are just the best team in the world right now. They look incredibly solid. And, you know, again, you look at the isolated best of 3 against Vitality. You can make excuses, you can make reasons. And I think for my money, if you can come up with a really solid reason for why they're getting beaten, then it's a fair enough beat, right? They got outplayed. You have Masuta popping off, Saiwu pops off. Fine. We write that one off. We go again. I think still looking at this, it is who beats Gambit. As G2, decent shout. Maybe 30% for my money, depending on the veto, depending who shows up, if they can really silence Gambit. Then in that final, I'm going to be honest, if Gambit make it to the final, I don't see a team in this bracket beating them by that point because they will have dispatched of G2. And G2, for my money, are the closest competitors right now. They're the team I look at and go, you on a good day could take Gambit. With the new system, with the new stuff, you've looked really solid. You could take Gambit. Everybody else in this bracket, you know, you got Resurgent VP, you've got Vitality trying to work out the new system with a couple of players popping off, and you got OG calling very smart CS. But again, almost the sleeper team, right? They were the sleeper team for Flashpoint. They almost are again here. You're not expecting a tournament win just yet. And I will put just yet on there because I think OG in this current iteration are capable of big tournament wins. It's just getting the time behind the squad to get to that point. So, yeah, for me, it's still Gambit.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think that actually I do really like this playoff bracket because there's a lot of positives that could play out for any of these teams. And even if a lot of them might be out of the conversation to win it, there's still a finals place up for grabs. There's still semi-final places up for grabs. So there's a lot of storylines for me from that perspective. And of course, with some of the teams we've got here, this isn't, you know, whatever, an Astralis, you know, Na'Vi, Gambit, whatever playoff bracket where it's just a heroic playoff bracket where it's just like the same people are back again. And, you know, we're going to see the same matchups again. And it's just a question of, do Astralis win the next tournament? You know, it's not like that anymore. Even as much as Gambit's looked great, I still see a lot of different storylines here. And if they do win it, I think it'll still be pretty impressive. Actually, with these players are going to be these teams are going to be up against, and they're going to be very different teams to what they've been playing recently, especially in the CIS games and all that. Especially if you know there's no team in the CIS region that's going to play like OG at all, or even G2. So they'll get a bit of a shock there, perhaps. But I think there's good potential for almost every game here in this playoff bracket to be good, especially if EG shows up pretty well. Then we're probably going to get 6 good series, which is a good thing because we don't always get that. Sometimes it's just like a team slips into the playoffs. Maybe they shouldn't have been there on true form, and then they just get absolutely wrecked by, you know, Gambit or something or whatever. But hopefully in this one we get some good series. And I guess, yes, this will end at the end of this week, probably Sunday will be the final, I'm guessing, for this one.
Yeah,
I think.
It is Sunday. So
we'll probably have another episode after this one going into, it'll be Blast Finals, won't it? That's only 5 days long or something, that one. I can't remember, something like that. Ends on the 20th, I believe. So that'll be a good point to reflect on this one, and then certainly some of these teams are going to be there again, aren't they? Playing at That's a blast, and that's another big event, probably a big event actually, than this one. So there'll be loads of good storylines there, and then we can reflect on all of this and go into that one. And we've got a good progression of tournaments at the moment to reflect on the storylines, reset, and then go into the next one. So I think we've covered all of the IEM. I'm guessing there's nothing else you want to touch on. I think we're good.
Just a quick thank you to Valve for putting Ancient in the pool and not fucking caving to the community saying it's dog shit. It's been a great map to watch in these opening series. Yes, there are some minor bits and pieces. I think the first batch of improvements was great. They clearly looked at the pro games and gone, yep, fix things. They've looked at scrims, they've gone fix shit. Yes, they've broken some wall bangs, but it's playing like a great map. It's playing better than Vertigo did when it came into the pool. I think the community, they lashed out because they don't like change, and then they complain when we don't get enough of it. New maps, thank you very much. Plays really nice to see something new. And yeah, just a big props to Valve for getting that in.
Well, I mean, the fans are all total like hypocrites and stuff like that, where like everyone's screaming for new maps and more variety, and when a new map comes in and it's a bit rough around the edges, which is guaranteed, no matter, even if you had a proper base testing system or whatever, there's no way you'd you just don't know until the pros get a hold of it what's going to happen. So yes, I think actually Ancient, the thing about Ancient is that for the first time, it feels like for a Valve map for a while, there's no really big fundamental problems where it's a flat map. We've got no stupid verticality. There's no sky. There's no roofs everywhere. So the concern for me, like a season, for example, is there's way too many roofs. There's like you can't execute properly. Like it's all super thin choke points and stuff. The good thing about Ancient is there's none of that. It's all wide open. You can throw all the nades. And it's all flat, so you don't get any of the verticality problems. So fundamentally, there's not going to be any big issues. It's just now about tweaking it and getting it to work at the pro level. And obviously, that's going to take 6 months. So you're probably looking at the major for that map as well to be in good form. So we'll keep track of that with the teams and see if Vitality or Ancient are better by the major. See which one is best by the major. All right, we hit everything.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, we're all good. As we said, we'll do another one probably before Blast Finals. We'll reflect on our predictions now. They're all completely wrong next week. And we'll catch you all guys then. Have a good one and peace out.